He's pretty. There is some amazing acting in the first two. That's for
Yeah.
sure. De Niro, young De Niro, he plays the young Godfather, and it's very good. But
Right.
anyway, it's movie talk. Everybody's like, who just joined is like, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about
Siskel and Ebert.
Yeah, right. Thumbs up. Oh man. Awesome. Well, it is 2:30 and we've got lots of people here. Welcome everyone. Should get started. So
Okay.
yeah, let's get going. Hello everybody. My name is Elisa Giffier. I'm head of youth services here at Lake Villa District Library, and yes, I'm joining you from a very socially distant location here at the library for this very special event. We are truly honored at Lake Villa. We have a local connection to two people who create wonderful books. We've had as a colleague Julie Halpern Cordell. She's the author of acclaimed young adult novels. And of course, our guest today is Julie's husband, the award-winning author and illustrator, Matthew Cordell. And I can tell you that we were really over the moon when Matt won the 2018 Caldecott Medal. It's the nation's highest honor for picture book illustration for Wolf in the Snow, and honored as well. So when he agreed to do the artwork for our 1,000 Books Before Kindergarten program. So if you want to find out more about that, definitely visit us at the library or check it out on our website, lvdl.org. And of course, in addition to all of his other wonderful books, we were truly ecstatic to hear that he had a new book coming out in spring of this year, and that it was the authorized picture book biography of one of the nation's most iconic figures, Fred Rogers. Matt's book is entitled Hello Neighbor, The Kind and Caring World of Mr. Rogers, and it's truly wonderful. Through his words and just incredibly warm artwork, Matt has captured just what made Mr. Rogers just such a revered figure during his lifetime and continuing on today. I know that I teared up when reading this book, and I challenge any of you not to tear up when reading it. And of course, in addition to hosting Matt today, as you know, it's our great pleasure to give away 5 signed copies of the book, Hello Neighbor, to 5 lucky winners. Unfortunately, we can't have Matt draw tickets out of a fish bowl like we have had in the past when he's visited us. So we'll be doing the drawing after today's webinar, and I will get in touch with the winners afterward. So I will stop talking, and without further ado, I will turn over the electronic floor to Matt. Please save your questions, and we'll do a Q&A session at the end. You can type your questions into the little Zoomy thing. And I will make myself disappear, and please join me in giving a big virtual hand for Matthew Cordell.
Okay, thanks so much, Elisa, for that lovely intro, and thank you to LVDL for having me. It's one of my favorite libraries, one of my favorite public libraries, definitely, that I've been to, really. Thank you all for being here today. It's always exciting to talk to people, and I'm glad that we still have ways to do that now, talk about our books and read our books to young readers in this day and age. So thank you all for being here. So I have a PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to click on. Just give me 1 second. Okay. Okay, good. All right, so this is my new book. It's Hello Neighbor. So this is my first. I've written and illustrated books. Every book that I've written has been fiction, and illustrated has been fiction. This is my first work of nonfiction, and so it's been a really important book for me because of that. Because my first nonfiction picture book, but also because it's about a personal role model, personal hero of mine, Fred Rogers. So I've been really excited to talk about this book ever since it came out back in May. So I'm going to read it and talk about how the book was made. But first I'd like to tell you a little bit about me. So that's a drawing of Fred, Mr. Rogers, and Mr. McFeely there. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. So I live in the Lake Villa area. I live in Gurnee. So you probably, if you're watching from the Lake Villa area, I'm sure you know where Gurnee is. So that's where I live. I'm married to Julie. Julie is, as we just heard a minute ago, Julie's a young adult author. And Julie also wrote the very first picture book that I illustrated. It's called Toby and the Snowflakes. So that was the first picture book I worked on, and she wrote it. And that's sort of how I got into the business. So Julie and I, we have 2 children. Our oldest is our daughter, Romy. And this is a picture of Romy from probably a few years ago. Romy is, she doesn't dress like this every day. She's in a costume. Romy is dressed as, if there's any Star Wars fans out there like me, I love Star Wars. Romy is dressed as Rey from Star Wars. And Romy has a little brother, our son Dean. Romy's 11 and Dean is 7. So this is a picture of Dean. And Dean, he's also in a costume. Dean is dressed as BB-8, Rey's sidekick droid from A Force Awakens. And we have one more member of our family, and that is our cat Norbert is his name. If there's any Harry Potter fans, we're big Harry Potter fans, and my daughter Romy named him Norbert after this dragon that Hagrid had in the first Harry Potter book. So Norbert is our cat. And so now I'd like to tell you a little bit about what I do as an author and an illustrator. And when I tell boys and girls at schools and libraries what I do for my job, I like to start out by showing you where I work, and I call it my studio or my office. And this is a picture of my studio. And I bet you're thinking right now, this is a very clean, tidy, nice studio that Matthew Cordell works in. You're probably not thinking that, actually. It's kind of messy. It's actually kind of messier than this right now. So I like to show people my studio when it's messy, and tell boys and girls that sometimes a little bit of mess is okay, because when I'm working on books, it gets messy. The things that I'm using, the art supplies, the books I might be looking at for research. So it gets a little bit messy in my studio. So I don't like to clean up my studio and show boys and girls what it looks like after I clean. I like to show them, what does my studio look like when I'm busy working? What does it look like on an average day? So there's a few places that are important to me in my studio. I have 2 different desks. I have one desk where I make the pictures in my books, and the type of pictures that I make, and I don't know if you guys know this, but a lot of illustrators now make their pictures completely on the computer. So they sketch them on the computer with on a tablet screen or on the computer screen with a special type of pen called a stylus. Maybe some of my younger friends or some of my adult friends watching have made art on the computer, because that's something that is more and more popular these days. But I make all my pictures kind of the old school, old-fashioned way, where you actually draw with paper and pens and pencils and paintbrushes. So I make all my pictures on paper at this desk here, and I draw in pen and ink, which means I use a pen like this type of pen here that I have to dip into a bottle of ink, like this. So I dip the pen into this ink, and then I draw with it. And the reason I use that pen and that ink is it gives me a different type of line. If you just draw and write with a pen that looks kind of like this, like you can buy like at an office supply store, it's just all very one same kind of line. But if I use these special pens, I can make it thick or thin or scratchy. So I draw in pen and ink, but it's all black drawings. When I want to make the color in the pictures, I use watercolor paint. So I do all that here at my art desk. Now, I do use the computer every day when I'm working. Mostly when I'm writing stories, I like to write on the computer. And I also use the computer for business reasons. So I need to do a lot of emailing and talking to the companies that publish or print the books. So I'm at my computer every day doing, more business and writing. And so I do have 2 desks. And also in my studio, lots of art supplies, like in drawers and cabinets. Lots of mailing supplies, things because I need to mail sketches and mail finished artwork back and forth to the publishers of the books that I work on. Lots of books in my studio. Now, some of the books here that you see are books that I've made myself over the years. Every time I make a new book, I get you know, a stack of books from the publisher. They give them to me for free. So I have like shelves and shelves full of books that I've made over the years. But I love books, and I have loved books my whole life. So I collect books and buy books and check out books from the library and surround myself with books in my studio, because I like to take inspiration from the work that other people do, you know, because I don't just like to work sort of by myself in this vacuum where I don't see anything that anyone else is doing. I love to see what other people are doing and get inspired by the stories they tell and the pictures they draw. Now, these are all books that I've done. Now, these are picture books I've done. And some of the books in this slide, actually the top 2 rows, almost all of those books were books that were written by another author, and I was asked to draw the pictures for their story. I was asked by the publisher of the book. Now, Trouble Gum on the second row and the bottom row of books were books that I wrote and illustrated myself. So I did, you know, both parts of the story. So, okay, you know, I've done a little bit of both in picture books, some illustrating only, and then some writing and illustrating. I also illustrate chapter books. So these are for older readers. I've never written a chapter book yet. I might do that eventually, but I do get asked occasionally to illustrate a chapter book that another author has written. And the last type of book I illustrate would be a poetry book. So I don't write poetry either, but occasionally I'm asked by a publisher to provide drawings, pictures for collections of poetry, or books that are written in verse, like that Gone Fishing is actually a novel, but it's written with poems. So those are the different types of books I've worked on as author and illustrator. So now I want to go back in time a little bit and talk to you about what I was like as a little boy. So that's a picture of me when I was about 4 years old. And when I was 4 years old, we didn't have this, you know, vast selection of television programs that boys and girls have today. We had on PBS, or, you know, where you see shows like Sesame Street and Peg Plus Cat, or what else is on there? Whatever, I'm trying to remember some Nature Cat, things like that. We didn't have so many programs. We had a few. And the 3 that I loved that I can remember, the first one was Sesame Street, which is still going strong. I still love Sesame Street. So this was a picture of what Sesame Street looked like when I was a little boy, the different characters, people, they have a lot of the same puppet characters that are still on there. Another program that I loved was called The Electric Company, and that's not on anymore. I think they brought it back for a while and sort of remade it and made it into this new sort of version of it. But that was in the, you know, the late 70s, The Electric Company, and I loved The Electric Company. And the last program that I loved was Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And you know, I loved that, and I you know, I remembered all these shows as I was growing up. You know, I always remembered them fondly, and some of my younger friends watching today might not be familiar with Mr. Rogers or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, but I bet you've probably heard of a television program called Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. So if you know Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, Daniel Tiger was a character created by Mr. Rogers, and he was a regular puppet character on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So in this slide, we see Daniel Tiger as he looks today in that animation, and we see Mr. Rogers holding the puppet of Daniel Tiger as he first appeared on television. So Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, a lot of the characters that are on that program used to be on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So if you do know Daniel, then you know a lot about what Mr. Rogers was like, and a lot of the stories he liked to talk about, and messages he liked to share, and love and kindness. So but when I grew up, you know, Mr. Rogers was such a huge deal, and he still is, I think, with a lot of grown-ups and families. So I'd like to tell you a little bit, if you're not familiar with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, how the program went each day. So Mr. Rogers was a character. He was the main character on this television program. And in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, he would come through this door every day and he spoke directly to the boys and girls who were watching. So he would come in every day and say hello, and he would sing and talk to boys and girls. And he would come in his suit, you know, his tie and jacket, and he would change into a more comfortable sweater, and he would change out of his dress shoes into more comfortable sneakers, so that he would get more comfortable and everybody could be comfortable together in this little neighborhood visit for every program. And then he would bring on a guest. This was a regular character who appeared on the program. His name was Mr. McFeely. And this guest might bring on an object or introduce a new concept or idea or something new that boys and girls could talk about and think about. And then they would go into this other part of the television program that was all make-believe. So in the beginning, it was all kind of real stuff and real people. And then they would go to this part of the program where there were puppet characters and it was more fantasy-based, but they would still talk about whatever they talked about at the beginning of the program. And in this picture, we see King Friday the 13th, the puppet, who was a regular puppet character in the neighborhood of make-believe. And that is Handyman Negri is another character in the neighborhood of make-believe. And then after we would leave the neighborhood of make-believe back into Mr. Rogers' real neighborhood, he would talk a little bit more about the subject that was introduced at the beginning of the program. And then he would sing again, and he would change back out of his sweater and back into his jacket and dress shoes and say goodbye for the day. And so, you know, I loved so much about the program growing up. There was so much music, and they would talk about, you know, loving things and fun things, but also serious things that you didn't always get in different television programs for boys and girls. So, and then as an adult, I started watching it again when my daughter was born. And it really impressed me so much, the idea of Mr. Rogers, because I could see as a dad and as a parent and as an adult that there were all these things, these beautiful, wonderful things that were talked about on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood that don't always get talked about on other television programs. And would talk about kindness and acceptance of others, tolerance of others, being curious about the world around us, being patient with others, you know, being selfless or caring about others and not just ourselves. And underneath all of that, you could always feel this very genuine, this very real love and respect that Mr. Rogers had for boys and girls everywhere. And I have that same love and respect for boys and girls everywhere. I just have I take so much inspiration from the children of the world. I just see so much potential in boys and girls, and so much positivity, and I just love the company of children, and I love that about Mr. Rogers. So as an adult, I rediscovered Mr. Rogers, and I knew from that point I wanted to make a book about him so that boys and girls and families could read about him in a picture book today. So that is how Hello Neighbor sort of came to be in the beginning stages. So I'd like to read the book to you now. So this is the cover, or the cover of the book, Hello Neighbor, The Kind and Caring World of Mr. Rogers. And on the very first page, we see this flashing yellow traffic light. And that was one of the first things that you saw on every episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And that was sort of a message for viewers to, you know, yellow light means slow down. And he wanted boys and girls and moms and dads and families to slow down for this episode and spend some time watching and thinking together. So I wanted to put that at the beginning of the book as well. And on the very first 2 pages, the next 2 pages, I have a quote, one of my favorite quotes from Mr. Rogers. And he said, "It's our insides that make us who we are, that allow us to dream and wonder and feel for others. That's what's essential. That's what will always make the biggest difference in our world." We see a picture of Fred, who played the piano throughout his life, and all these wonderful things that made his life so special. It is, you know, coming out of the music that he's playing, all these different characters he created and things that he did in his life. And that's the title page, Hello Neighbor. And the story starts here. We see a little town, and you see there's a hand putting a little toy car into this town. And it says, "Welcome to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood." And if you look closely, you see where that hand is putting in the car is a model of a town. And it says, as you can see, this is no ordinary neighborhood. It's the set for a television program, a children's television program that's connected with countless families since it was first broadcast nationally in 1968. There were many things that made it different from your neighborhood. There were actors, camera operators, musicians, stage sets, and puppets. It took a great deal of work to bring the neighborhood to life each day. And it was all started by a man named Fred McFeely Rogers. And we see Fred, he's on a television monitor there, and we see in the background, on the set of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood being filmed. Growing up near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Fred had many interests. He especially loved playing with puppets and music. He learned to play the piano at the age of 5. Fred's family was proud of his talent and encouraged him to study music and composition as he got older. Fred was shy and often lonely. He was sometimes bullied, but whimsy and imagination were helpful to him, and so was his faith. After college, he planned to become a minister, and years later, he did become a special kind of minister. But at this moment in his life, something unexpected happened. In those days, television was new and just beginning to become popular, and Fred didn't like what he saw. I saw people throwing pies in each other's faces and all kinds of demeaning behavior, and I thought, why is it being used in this way? This could be a wonderful tool for education. So I said to my parents, I think maybe I'll go into television. So he went to work for the National Broadcasting Company in New York City to learn how television programs are made. At first, Fred simply ran errands and fetched things that were needed around the studio, and he learned a great deal. Best of all, he learned that connecting with younger viewers through children's television was what he loved the most. And we see on the bottom of this picture, he worked on a television program for boys and girls at that time. It was called the Gabby Hayes Show. So he really loved the idea of working on television with younger viewers. Fred moved back to Pittsburgh and began working on a television program for children. He continued to stay behind the scenes, but he took on a more creative role. Drawing on his background in music, he wrote songs and created characters, returning to his childhood love of puppetry. And at this time, he wasn't working on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He was working on a television program called The Children's Corner. But at that time is when he created a lot of these puppet characters. And as you can see, a lot of these characters, maybe all of these, are on Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. Henrietta Pussycat, Daniel Tiger, X the Owl, King Friday the 13th. As an adult, Fred remembered the wonder of childhood as well as the fears. He spent a lot of time studying and learning about children and about their needs and feelings. And in time, it became obvious to him that too much of children's television was no more than silly and flashy entertainment. Fred had a new mission: to create a very different kind of children's television program that spoke to its audience with respect and understanding. A program where Fred would perform as never before in front of the camera and speak directly to his audience. And he would simply be his honest self, curious and playful, attentive and compassionate. And this is another favorite quote of mine. He's saying, the greatest gift you can give is your honest self. And I've always felt that way too. I've always felt that when I talk to boys and girls and other people in life, that I don't need to be a performer. I don't need to be, a clown if I'm not a clown. I'm not always feeling silly and goofy. I like to connect with people just by showing them who I am. And I love when other people do that with me. So I love to just be my honest self. On February 19th, 1968, Fred became a permanent resident of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood when it premiered nationally on public television. In the very first episodes, this was, in the 1960s when television was still in black and white. It wasn't in color yet. And now, welcome back to the neighborhood. So now we're going to talk a bit more about the Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Fred began every episode by singing his welcoming song and changing into his comfortable cardigan, sweater, and sneakers. Then a new idea, person, or place would be introduced. Just like in life, there were good times in the neighborhood, like visiting a circus or a neighborhood school. But there were difficult times too, like saying goodbye to a beloved pet. Fred understood that children have many feelings and interests, and all of them are worth mentioning and exploring. Mr. Rogers had many regular visitors, like Mr. McFeely, a friend who brought deliveries and discoveries, and Joe Negri, who owned a nearby music store. And on this page, I want to get it a little bit bigger. Welcoming and accepting others and their differences was of great importance in the neighborhood. Fred made sure to include a diverse range of actors performing important roles. Police Officer Clemens was the first African-American character to appear in a recurring role on a children's television series. And this is one of the things I've continued to love about Mr. Rogers and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood is he was such a big advocate and wanting there to be men and women characters, boys and girls, as well as people from different races, you know, different colors of skin, different cultures, different languages spoken at times. And I just love that so much, that he wanted to welcome people from all different walks of life. I just think that's such a beautiful thing when an artist or a person wants to, especially one that works with children, wants to show that people of all kinds can love and respect each other. Fred realized that children were naturally curious about the world around them. So as Mr. Rogers, he often took us out of his home to meet new people and discover new places. We found out how people make things and how workers do their jobs. We even met world-famous artists in the neighborhood like Eric Carle, and if you know the Very Hungry Caterpillar, that book, Eric Carle made that book, as well as many other beautiful books. Yo-Yo Ma, who's a world-famous cello player, and Margaret Hamilton. If you've seen the Wizard of Oz movie, Margaret Hamilton played the Wicked Witch in that movie, and she came on to Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and talked about how she just performed that part. You know, she wasn't a real scary witch, which is one of the wonderful things that he would talk about is, you know, what's real and what's make-believe. Each day in the neighborhood, we spent time pretending when Trolley took us from Fred's television house to the neighborhood of make-believe. Here in the neighborhood of make-believe, an ensemble cast of puppets and people acted out a story about the subject introduced in the beginning of each episode. When Mr. Rogers visited a school, the neighborhood of make-believe built a school. When we saw how people make crayons in the real neighborhood, the neighborhood of make-believe held a coloring contest. So these are all the wonderful puppet characters and different people characters in their different costumes that could be found every day in the neighborhood of make-believe. It's a very fantastical, colorful place, a little different, you know, very different from the world of the Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, the regular neighborhood. Fred loved the expressive and connective nature of playing and listening to music, so lots of music was played throughout the neighborhood. A jazz trio played the background music throughout the program, and of course, each day in the neighborhood, Fred sang the songs he had composed. Throughout his career, Fred wrote hundreds of songs about the important things children feel and learn as they grow, like Many Ways to Say I Love You, What Do You Do with the Mad That You Feel, and It's You I Like. Every visit to the neighborhood would end as it began. Mr. Rogers changed back into his jacket and dress shoes while singing his song of love and reassurance to let us know he would be back next time. Fred played many roles in the making of more than 900 episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He wrote the scripts, he was songwriter and singer, performer and puppeteer. He oversaw and approved what went on in every episode. Beyond his own contributions, he truly loved working with others. He respected and appreciated the talents and artistry of all who were involved in the creation of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And because of this, everyone felt connected in a very sincere and personal way. Just like a real neighborhood. So the people and actors and creators and writers and performers, all the people that worked on the program, it was like a real neighborhood of people. It was just like a real neighborhood, just like yours. We see Mr. Rogers spending time in this neighborhood of boys and girls and children of all different races, all different walks of life. And that's the end of the book itself. At the back of the book, I have a longer essay that talks a lot more about his life and the work that he did and the different things that he experienced in his childhood and in his adult life. I won't read this because it's pretty long, but if you get a chance to see the book, make sure you read that. And there's also photographs in the back of the book that you can see that the real people that were on the television program each day, and some of the behind the scenes photographs and different things that Fred Rogers did. He visited with children at schools. And this is my favorite part of the back of the book. It's called the visual glossary. So I did put lots of details in these pictures of this book, a lot of things that I love and that are special to me and others that know Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood that I don't really talk about in the text of the book. So if you go back and read this visual glossary, there's little details, little things from different pictures and there's text that explains the significance or the importance of the pictures, the little details in these pictures. And you can go back on the other pages and look for where these little hidden pictures and these hidden things are back in the other parts of the book. And then there's an essay about my connection to Mr. Rogers and me, a bunch of people that I needed to thank, because it wasn't just me working on this book. I worked with a lot of other people who helped me make the book as best as it could be. I worked with people that knew and loved and worked directly with Fred Rogers and the company Fred Rogers Productions. I worked with them directly, as well as my editor and an art director and people at the publishing company that helped me make this book as best as it could be. So I wanted to say thank you to all of these special people. And on the last page is another favorite quote of mine of Mr. Rogers, and he said this at the end of every television episode. He would say, "You are a very special person. There's only one person like you in the whole world. There's never been anyone exactly like you before, and there will never be again. And people can like you just because you're you." And I think that's a wonderful sentiment to end every program with, to talk about how significant we all are in the context of our lives and our experiences with others and how we can make a difference. And so I wanted to end the book as well, the same way that Mr. Rogers would end every episode. So that's the end of the book, and I just want to show you a few of the things that were important to me when I was learning how to make the story, how to write the story, how to draw the pictures, and this was different research, things I had to look up and find out information about, and some of it is research for pictures, and some of it is research for Mr. Rogers' life. So when I was first working on the story, the text for the book, I went to Pittsburgh, which is where Mr. Rogers worked and lived, and where the company that created that produced the television program still exists. It's called, at that time when I visited it a couple years ago, it was called the Fred Rogers Company. Now it's called Fred Rogers Productions. They had a little bit of a name change. So I met with people at the company Fred Rogers Productions makes current television programs for boys and girls. Like I said, they make Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. They also make Odd Squad and Peg Plus Cat. So they still make popular, lots of well-known television programs that are on PBS today. So I got to go there with my family on this trip to Pittsburgh. And the very first thing when I got into the office of Fred Rogers Productions that I saw, they had this model town that we would see at the beginning of every episode and end of every episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And I knew I was in for a real treat as soon as I saw the actual town that I saw growing up. And as an adult too, every episode of Mr. Rogers, you see this little model town. It was such a special way to start this day. And these are the different people that I got to meet and work with throughout the making of the book at Fred Rogers Productions. So all of these men and women have worked in children's television their whole careers, and they've also, many of them have worked with Fred Rogers. So Hedda Sherpan, who's on the top left, and she worked with, for instance, she worked with Fred from the very first episode to the very last episode. So all of these men and women knew so much detail, and they had so much, they were such a valuable resource of information for me to talk to about what he was like as a person and what he liked and what he didn't like. So I was a wonderful opportunity to be able to work with them and exchange ideas. I also went to a place called the Fred Rogers Center, which is in the town that he grew up outside of Pittsburgh, called Latrobe, Pennsylvania. And there they have a big archive of photographs, lots of notebooks and boxes full of photographs that I needed to find and see in order to draw the pictures in the book. And also at the Fred Rogers Center, they have an exhibition of different significant things that were seen on each television program. These are some of the different sweaters that Fred wore when he would, perform, when he was on every episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and he changed into a sweater and sneakers. They had the actual things there. They had Neighborhood Trolley, which was one of my favorite things about the show growing up. How Neighborhood Trolley would take us from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood to the neighborhood of make-believe. They had the original puppets that were seen in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So it was just so fantastic to be able to see these up close and take pictures, because I knew I was going to need to draw these with detail later. And in different parts of Pittsburgh, they still have on display big set pieces from the television program. This was at the Heinz History Center in Pittsburgh, where they have a big, they have a whole display of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood memorabilia and set pieces. And this was the treehouse where X the Owl and Henrietta Pussycat lived. So when I was ready to start drawing the pictures, first I have to figure out, because Mr. Rogers is on every page of the book, I really needed to draw him in my own illustration style and figure out how that was going to work, sort of simplified, because my drawings they're not realistic. So I had to draw him in the style that I like to draw in, but it still needed to look like Mr. Rogers. So I did, lots and lots of studies like this page, where I would study and try to figure out the colors that I wanted to use, and this posture, and maybe some of the ways that he might look, for instance, if he's putting on his shoe. So I had to do lots of picture studies like this, and some other studies where I would need to draw him in black and white. As I mentioned, the television program was not in color at first. So I wanted to test out what might he look like in just grays and blacks and whites. So this was an example of how I make my artwork. So I start out by drawing, like I mentioned a little bit earlier. It's a pen that I dip into ink. It doesn't have ink inside the pen like a lot of pens we use today. This is a drawing pen. So you can see I've drawn, sort of in my loose, scratchy way that I love to draw, this picture of Mr. Rogers changing his shoes. And then when I want to color it, I start to paint that same drawing in watercolor paint. So once the ink dries from the drawing, I can put watercolor paint on it, and that ink will not run. It's waterproof ink. And this is what a finished drawing would look like in Hello Neighbor or any other of my books, when it's finished with the pen and ink in the watercolor. So the last thing I wanted to just share with you is probably one of my all-time favorite quotes from Mr. Rogers. And I love this because I think, the thing that I love so much about Mr. Rogers, one of the many things, is how he loved to talk about kindness. He loved to talk about sharing kindness and being kind and accepting kindness from others. So I think this is a wonderful quote to end on today, and for us to remember in times when things don't always feel very kind, when people around us aren't always being kind. But it's important for us to try to be kind and try to share that kindness with others. So hopefully it could rub off on someone else who's not being kind. And he said, there are 3 ways to ultimate success. The first is to be kind. The second way is to be kind. And the third way is to be kind. And I just love that so much. How the 3 ways to ultimate success are really just to always be kind to others, And maybe it'll change someone who's having a bad day. Maybe it'll change someone who's angry about something. And I think that's what we all need right now. You know, people are frustrated and upset and sad, and if they just get a little more kindness in their lives, maybe it'll turn things around for all of us. So I just want to say, let's all be kind. You know, let's listen to Fred. Let's think about Mr. Rogers, and share a little kindness with each other. And with that, I just want to say thank you. And I'd love to hear any questions anyone might have about anything I talked about. So feel free to fire away with some questions. Oh, yeah. Oh, no. It's good to be prepared. Oh, not that I know of, because I would say probably not, because the movies were filmed. Well, there was a really, my favorite in recent years is a documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, I think. Is that the name of the doc? They're very similar name. The fictionalized, or semi-fictionalized biopic that came out. Anyway, my favorite is the documentary. Actually, I have a copy of it. One second. Uh, yes. Won't You Be My Neighbor? I love this documentary. If you haven't seen that and you love Mr. Rogers, highly recommend the documentary. That came out just when I was getting just started on making just getting started, just thinking about what I was going to write and the pictures I was going to draw. There was more recently, there was a Hollywood movie, with Tom Hanks and everything. And that was also filmed before I had done any pictures for the book. So probably not. I wish, that would have been so cool, actually, if I had been done with some pictures and somehow they snuck one of those drawings into the movie set. Or what if I could be in the movie, like lurking in the background? But no, unfortunately, I don't believe that was anything of mine in either of the films. I wasn't. So when I went to Pittsburgh, Joanne is her name. She's pretty up there. I think she's in her 90s now, and from what I know of her, she's really very very all together, which is fantastic when you reach the age of 90 and you can still be in such good health, mentally and physically. However, when I had got there, I think what they had been filming parts of the movie, and the people making the movie they really wanted to spend time with Joanne, so they were kind of carting her around, and for a 90-year-old person, it was a lot to ask, and so the people at Fred Rogers Productions were kind of keeping her they were kind of shielding her from having to have too many obligations at that, for a 90-year-old woman, which I fully understand and respect. And I was hoping, there was supposed to be a book tour for Hello Neighbor in May when the book came out. And I was part of the book tour. I was going to be spending some time in Pittsburgh, and I was really hoping I could meet Joanne and spend a little bit of time with her and talk to her and share the book with her. Unfortunately, as you know, we've all been stuck in our homes, no traveling. So I haven't been able to meet her. I hope eventually I'll be able to get to Pittsburgh and just at least say hello and shake her hand and just be able to say hello and talk to her just for a couple minutes, because I would love to share with her how much she both, because I'm sure she had a lot to do with the program.